Florida has long been the crown jewel of American tourism, where sunshine wasn't just weather, it was an economic engine. For decades, millions of Canadian snowbirds, international visitors, and domestic tourists transformed beaches and condo towers into billion-dollar industries. But in 2025, that engine stalled. Not from hurricanes, not from recession, but from something more insidious. A perfect storm of political rhetoric, trade tensions, and policy changes that triggered a mass exodus of Florida's most valuable customer base. The Canadian snowbirds, who contributed $6.5 billion annually to Florida's economy, began staying away in unprecedented numbers. With them went property tax revenue, medical clinic income, restaurant sales, and tens of thousands of seasonal jobs. This wasn't a gradual decline. It was a collapse measured in months, not years, and its effects are rippling through every sector of Florida's economy. The warning signs. By early 2025, the data was undeniable. Visit Florida reported visitor growth from Canada down 17% in the first quarter and 20% in the second quarter, compared to the previous year. For a state where Canadians made up 27% of international visitors in 2024, these weren't minor fluctuations. They were alarm bells. Canadian snowbird bookings collapsed in multiple regions. Fort Lauderdale businesses reported declines of 10–16% in Canadian visitors since April, translating to an estimated $90 million in lost economic activity for Broward County alone. In Hollywood, Florida, hotel owners who typically cater to Quebec snowbirds saw reservations down 50% by midsummer compared to normal booking patterns. The decline wasn't limited to one region. Across Florida's Gulf Coast, property searches by Canadian buyers fell precipitously. Fort Myers realtors reported Canadian condo listings tripling from normal levels as owners decided to sell rather than maintain properties they no longer plan to visit. In Sarasota and Naples, traditionally heavy snowbird markets, inventory surged while buyer interest from Canada evaporated. Airlines felt the impact immediately. Routes connecting Canadian cities to Tampa, Fort Myers, and Orlando saw booking declines ranging from 20–40%, forcing carriers to reduce capacity and cut seasonal service. Regional airports that had expanded terminals specifically for snowbird traffic now operated far below projections, leaving municipalities locked into debt payments without the revenue to support them. The economic model that Florida had built over decades, one dependent on reliable, high-spending, long-term Canadian visitors, was fracturing in real time. And the reasons were becoming clear. A toxic combination of trade tensions, political rhetoric, new entry requirements, and a weakened Canadian dollar. The causes. The exodus wasn't driven by a single factor but by multiple pressures converging simultaneously. The most visible was political tension. President Trump's repeated references to Canada as a potential 51st state and aggressive tariff threats created an atmosphere where many Canadians felt unwelcome. CBC News interviews with snowbirds revealed a common refrain: they no longer felt respected or wanted in the United States. One Toronto woman who had wintered in Fort Lauderdale for 15 years canceled her lease and switched to Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, citing Trump's rhetoric as the primary reason. New U.S. entry protocols added bureaucratic barriers. Requirements for fingerprinting and registration for stays longer than 30 days, combined with new $30 entry fees, made crossing the border more complicated and invasive. For snowbirds accustomed to seamless travel, these changes felt like hostility codified into policy. Economic pressures compounded the problem. The Canadian dollar's weakness against the U.S. dollar made Florida vacations significantly more expensive. Combined with soaring U.S. costs, particularly property insurance premiums that increased 68% in 2 years, the financial burden became unsustainable for many middle-class Canadian retirees. Survey data from the Travel Health Insurance Association of Canada revealed the scale of the pullback. Only 26% of Canadians indicated they were likely to visit the U.S. in 2025, representing a 37% drop from 2024. Snowbird Advisor surveys showed approximately 70% of snowbirds still plan to winter in the U.S., but this represented a nearly 15% decline from previous years. Even more concerning for Florida, a significant portion of those staying away were redirecting spending to alternative destinations, Portugal, Mexico, and the Caribbean, rather than simply staying home. The economic impact. The numbers tell a devastating story. Canadian snowbirds historically contributed an estimated $6.5 billion annually to Florida's economy, according to a 2018 Canada-Florida Economic Impact Study. While exact 2025 figures aren't yet available, the 17-20% decline in Canadian visitors translates to losses exceeding $1 billion in direct spending, with cascading effects throughout the economy. Real estate took the first major hit. Canadians represented 18% of international real estate buyers in Florida in 2025, investing over $1.3 billion in property purchases. As political tensions escalated, surveys showed 54% of Canadians who own U.S. property were considering selling within 12 months, with 62% citing the political climate as their primary reason. Realtors across Florida reported unprecedented inventory increases. Alexandra DuPont, a Fort Lauderdale realtor who works extensively with Canadian buyers, reported 36 condo listings, triple her normal inventory. "I've never had this many listings in my life," she said. Buyers? "I think I have one from Canada." In seasonal heavy markets like Naples, Sarasota, and Clearwater, this surge in supply without corresponding demand put downward pressure on property values, particularly in condo complexes, specifically designed for snowbird ownership. The restaurant and retail sectors experienced immediate pain. Canadians were known for longer stays and consistent spending, accounting for up to 35% of seasonal revenue in Gulf Coast communities. By spring 2025, restaurant associations reported sales down significantly during what should have been peak season, leading to thousands of layoffs. Retailers dependent on tourist consumption, from gift shops to grocery chains to golf suppliers, posted some of their worst quarterly numbers in years. Healthcare felt the collapse acutely. Snowbirds traditionally scheduled surgeries, dental work, and specialist visits during Florida winters. Outpatient centers in multiple counties reported patient volume declines of 40–60%. Clinics that had invested millions in expansion to serve snowbird demand suddenly operated at half capacity, with some seeking bankruptcy protection. Employment across tourism-dependent sectors contracted sharply. Florida's seasonal economy, which historically supported 200,000 service workers during peak months, shed tens of thousands of jobs. Hotels, restaurants, medical facilities, and retail operations all cut staff as Canadian visitor numbers plummeted. The broader economic effects extended beyond direct tourism spending. Property tax revenue from Canadian-owned real estate, estimated in the hundreds of millions annually, began declining. Municipal governments that had budgeted based on historical snowbird patterns faced unexpected shortfalls, forcing service cuts and infrastructure delays. The competition seizes the opportunity. As Florida bled Canadian tourists, competing destinations moved aggressively to capture the market. Portugal launched targeted campaigns in Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal, emphasizing safety, affordability, and welcoming policies. The Algarve coast saw Canadian bookings surge 44% in early 2025, with real estate inquiries up 52%. With average winter rentals at $1,200 monthly, half of typical Florida condo fees, Portugal offered comparable weather at a fraction of the cost. Mexico moved even faster. The government streamlined its retiree visa program, allowing Canadians to secure long-term residency in 30 days. Puerto Vallarta and Cancun saw Canadian arrivals rise 36% year over year. Healthcare costs sealed the appeal. A full checkup with dental care in Mexico averaged $95 compared to thousands in out-of-pocket U.S. charges. The Caribbean coordinated campaigns, emphasizing political stability and English-speaking services. Barbados, the Dominican Republic, and the Bahamas collectively recorded a 28% increase in Canadian bookings, with Barbados alone adding 11,000 long-stay Canadian retirees, contributing an estimated $350 million in seasonal spending, money that once flowed to Florida. This wasn't temporary market shifting. Canadians redirected billions in winter spending to destinations that welcomed them. And as they established new communities, purchased property, and built relationships, those diversions became permanent. Florida had spent decades building itself as the default snowbird destination. Competitors successfully rebranded it as the cautionary tale to avoid. The political response. Florida's political leadership initially downplayed the crisis. In early March 2025, Governor Ron DeSantis dismissed the significance of Canadian boycotts, noting that only 3.3 million of Florida's 142.9 million annual visitors were from Canada. "That's not much of a boycott in my book," he said. This framing ignored crucial context. While Canadians represented just 2.3% of total visitors, they made up 27% of international visitors and contributed disproportionately to the economy through long-term stays and property ownership. More importantly, DeSantis's dismissive tone contradicted concerns his own administration had raised during the COVID-19 pandemic about the economic devastation of losing Canadian snowbirds. The disconnect between rhetoric and economic reality widened as losses mounted. Tourism boards quietly documented the damage, while politicians publicly denied problems existed. Internal projections warned of billions in cumulative losses if trends continued, but legislative action moved in the opposite direction. Rather than addressing snowbird concerns, Florida advanced policies restricting foreign property ownership and maintained entry requirements that Canadians found burdensome. The federal government attempted damage control. In April 2025, Congress reintroduced the Canadian Snowbird Act, proposing to extend visa-free stays from 180 to 240 days for Canadians aged 50 and over. Senator Rick Scott of Florida co-sponsored the legislation, noting that extending stays could drive more investments into the state's economy and tourism industries and support more Florida jobs. But legislative proposals couldn't undo the reputational damage already done or reverse the flow of Canadian dollars to competing destinations. The permanent shift. The most troubling aspect of Florida's snowbird crisis is its structural permanence. Trust, once broken, rebuilds slowly, if at all. For decades, Canadians viewed Florida as a dependable, welcoming winter refuge. Once political hostility made them feel unwanted, they didn't simply wait for conditions to improve. They invested in alternatives. As Canadians purchased property in Portugal, established medical relationships in Mexico, and built communities in Caribbean destinations, those connections solidified. Reversing this migration requires not months, but years of consistent, stable, welcoming policy, something neither state nor federal governments have demonstrated. The infrastructure built for snowbird traffic now stands underutilized. Tampa International, Orlando, Sanford, and Southwest Florida International Airports expanded terminals for Canadian arrivals that are no longer materializing. Airlines have permanently cut routes. Municipalities remain locked into debt service on infrastructure that now operates at half capacity, with no clear path to restoring the revenue streams that justified those investments. Healthcare systems designed to expand seasonally face chronic underutilization. Gulf Coast medical facilities that built capacity for snowbird surges now operate with structural overcapacity, leading to financial stress and staff reductions that affect year-round residents as well. Real estate markets show no signs of recovery. Canadian property transactions in Florida fell 62% by mid-2025, and the supply-demand imbalance continues, pushing prices down in seasonal heavy markets. Sellers face thin buyer pools, while would-be purchasers wait for further price declines, creating a downward spiral that erodes property tax bases and household wealth. Employment in tourism-dependent sectors remains depressed. The seasonal jobs that once supported hundreds of thousands of Floridians during peak months have contracted by an estimated 35%, leaving workers underemployed or forced into other industries. The broader warning. Florida's crisis carries implications far beyond state borders. In 2024, foreign visitors contributed over $213 billion to U.S. GDP, supporting approximately 1.7 million American jobs. Canadians alone accounted for $22 billion annually, making them the single largest group of foreign tourists. A 10% national decline in Canadian travel translates to $2.1 billion in lost revenue and roughly 14,000 eliminated jobs. Other states heavily dependent on Canadian tourism: Arizona, Nevada, California, New York. Watch Florida's collapse with alarm. If Florida could lose 17–20% of Canadian visitors in months due to political tensions and policy changes, what prevents similar declines elsewhere? The precedent is established. Hostile rhetoric and unwelcoming policies equal vanishing revenue. Municipal bond markets are taking notice. Florida counties tied to Canadian property taxes have seen deficits balloon and credit ratings face pressure. Investors now factor political risk into tourism-dependent economies, a reputational hit that doesn't stay local but affects national perceptions of American reliability as a tourism destination. The mathematics of replacement are unforgiving. Domestic tourists cannot fill the gap left by departing snowbirds. Canadians spend an estimated $33,000 per household during 6-month stays. The average American tourist spends approximately $1,200 per week. Replacing one Canadian snowbird household requires 28 American families visiting annually. Across 500,000 Canadian snowbirds, Florida would need 14 million additional American tourist families each year to compensate. That demand doesn't exist and won't materialize through marketing alone. Conclusion: Florida's snowbird exodus represents a case study in how political decisions create economic consequences that persist long after the rhetoric fades. The state built an economy dependent on long-term, high-spending international visitors who felt welcome and valued. When political tensions, trade disputes, and policy changes made those visitors feel unwanted, they didn't just complain, they left, and they took billions of dollars with them. The damage isn't temporary or easily reversed. Trust erodes faster than it rebuilds. Infrastructure investments based on visitor projections become stranded assets. Employment dependent on seasonal economies evaporates. Property values decline. Tax revenues shrink. And competing destinations eagerly absorb the market share that Florida carelessly discarded. The question facing Florida and other tourism-dependent states is whether lessons will be learned from this self-inflicted wound. International tourism isn't a luxury or a side business. It's a core economic driver worth hundreds of billions nationally. Foreign visitors have options, and once they find welcoming alternatives, they rarely return to places where they felt unwanted. Florida marketed itself as the Sunshine State, a place of warmth and welcome. In 2025, it proved that economic engines built on goodwill can be destroyed by political calculation. The beaches remain, but the billions of dollars that once flowed to them are now enriching Portugal, Mexico, and the Caribbean. That's not a temporary setback. That's a permanent economic realignment. And Florida has no one to blame but itself.